more than 5 minutes. So all I want to do is I want to hop around to each table, and I just want your spokesperson to mention one thing that you talked about that came up. You guys were busy talking about all kinds of things. I'm going to see that in what you write about, and then I may be able to respond to that in other ways. So let's just start with this table right here. Whoever spokesperson, just share something, and please speak out loudly so folks can hear.
We thought it was interesting how Haley showed why they chose mercury for thermometers over other liquids.
Okay, so why did they choose mercury over other liquids?
Because mercury goes more noticeably but also gradually, whereas water, you couldn't really tell if it was rising when it heated up and then it started to boil. And the alcohol that he used was too varied as it rose.
Okay, so trying to explore liquids that were sensitive to temperature change. So this is all in the design of the instrument. You want to get a big change for a little effect. That's called what's called sensitivity in any sort of instrument measurement. So mercury gave you more sensitivity. Okay, let's go with this group over here.
We thought it was interesting how people used different substances to figure out their boiling and freezing points. So there's no way to match up what the real boiling point or freezing point would be. So they had to come up with a universal way of measuring.
Okay, so people knew that things would melt or boil higher or lower than other stuff, but they didn't have a standardized way to compare with other people. Okay, all right, so that was a challenge in terms of the measurement. Okay, how about this table?
It was interesting how when Galileo was first trying to make a way to measure temperature, his also measured air pressure. So then as time went on, scientists were trying to figure out how to just measure air temperature air pressure by itself and just measure temperature by itself. So it was easier to measure things.
So one of the early challenges was that if you have a column of liquid, which is what you have in a thermometer, if it's open to the atmosphere, that's going to change with the atmospheric pressure as well as with the temperature. And you saw folks arguing about what to do about that with the different designs. So that was a technical challenge. Something from this table.
Yeah, we thought it was interesting too, like Marissa was saying, how they would use different substances to measure they'd use the hottest day of the year or the coldest day. And then they used the melting temperature of butter. We didn't really get why with butter.
Okay, why do you think they picked butter?
I don't really know.
It's lying around, right? You know, everybody has butter, something, not every butter is the same, but it's a substance that you can test. And people might be concerned about whether it, liquefies when it's a particular temperature. So it was convenient material. People knew that butter would soften and melt. So they might be interested, well, if we're going to talk about temperature, what temperature does that happen to be at? Not the best thing to choose, but it's just something that was accessible. Okay. Something from this table.
We thought it was interesting to find out that Fahrenheit came before centigrade, because it was kind of a misconception that we had, and we all thought it was actually the opposite of that. So.
Okay, what scale came first? Okay, and you notice that there were multiple scales that people were trying to invent before kind of we settled on the two big ones that are used a lot are centigrade and Fahrenheit. And we didn't really get into the history of the choices of those things, but there were technical reasons why it was good to have a scale, have divisions that everybody agreed on, and then eventually everybody came to measure things in the same way, and that allowed you to make other sorts of inferences. One other thing I want to mention is about the butter thing is that think about the substances people had available to do experiments with. They had waters of different type, like fresh water, rainwater, ocean water. Okay? They had mercury, which they knew was a liquid. They had spirits. So that would have been anything that they had fermented and distilled, and they knew there was something in there like alcohol, but I didn't call it alcohol per se, but they knew it was different from water. Okay? So they would test that. And then oils. All kinds of things that come from animal products would have oil properties. Everybody's probably heard of whale blubber and whale oil. That was used obviously for burning and for other purposes, and so they had oils, and those are different substances, so if they were looking for a liquid, those are the things they had to go by. Okay? They didn't necessarily have other materials to use that had some sort of systematic properties that they could rely on. So they grabbed the stuff that was available and tried to test and see which things would work best. Okay? So it's interesting to look back. Now, just for purposes, Boyle, whose materials we read, late 1600s, he was born before Galileo died. Okay, so you think about Galileo being like ancient history and planetary science and other sciences, Boyle was like just the next generation after him. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a setting of when things are happening and what was known. And this was the state of the art in the 17th century in terms of our understanding of these things. Okay, very good. All right.